Hello everyone, in this short video I'm going to introduce you the qualitative research. We are about to address three different questions. First is, what is qualitative research? Why it is important? And how to conduct interviews, especially a technique we are going to focus is content analysis. Now first, let's review the research methods, the overall picture again. All right, so here we are talking about two large categories, qualitative methods and quantitative methods. And of course you can mix them together. That will create mixed methods. For qualitative, we are focusing on case studies and the interviews. The technique, as we discussed, we are going to talk about is content analysis. While for quantitative, we focus on survey data analysis and experiments. So let's compare qualitative with quantitative briefly. So first, for qualitative methods, usually focus on cases. It could be individuals, groups, or institutions, organizations, things like that. But rather than like a variables, it's a configuration of causes. Right, so usually it's a unique configuration of causes at work because when we talk about a case, it's situated in a particular setting. Right, and generally speaking, it focuses on small number studies. At least it used to be, right? Because recently, we find studies published in top rank field journals, usually more than 100 interviews, and some even more crazy have 400 interviews. So this is a totally different scale as it's used to be, right? But we are going to talk about like how many interviews are enough. It really depends on your research purpose and the questions you're asking. So purposive sampling. Generally speaking, if you're talking about case study, usually you have a specific purpose to select those representative cases or classic cases. But for quantitative, sometimes we prefer like random sampling because then you have a larger chance to generalize your finding from your sample to be applied to the whole population. All right, so this is a brief list of the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and of course, as we will see, there's many other differences, and but more importantly, maybe similarities. Okay, these are some schools of thought in qualitative research. So as you can see, it's quite interdisciplinary, being applied to many different fields. Schools of thought can came from ethnography, ethnomethodology, or grounded theory, narratorage, phenomenology, semiotics, social constructivism, or symbolic interactionism. So there's many different sorts from philosophy, literature, theology, sociology, anthropology, psychology, etc. So there's many ideas that influence qualitative research, and it's a variety spectrum of approaches that you can adopt when you are conducting qualitative research. Only here we focus on case studies and interviews. So for qualitative research, generally speaking, it helps discover important variables and the relationships, especially you don't have a specific research question in your mind. For instance, you want to know something about immigrants' life, but you really don't have a very clear direction in answering a particular research question. Then you can do a participatory observation study. You pretend yourself as an immigrant, live with them and talk to them, gather data and take field notes, and someday you may find, the thing you really want to research is about the relationship between their education background and how fast they can sort of become used to the environment and earn a decent living and truly become a member of the society, right? So how fast they can quickly become a member of the new society, that's probably on your outcome side. While the other thing you want to understand is how education background play a role in this process. So you can do that, right? So it helps you to discover important variables in relationships, and of course generalize theories and models. The reason behind education and getting used to a new environment is because education gives you knowledge and hopefully language skills and other critical skills that help you to find jobs, talk to people, get along. So it really help you become a member of the new society. All right. So and also it help you uncover possible causes or causal mechanisms, right? So why education is so important? Because as we said, it helps accumulate human capital, or maybe sometimes social capital as well, right? For instance, you immigrant to a new society, but in that new society you may find if you attend universities, you may find your alumni association, right? So that helps you a bit, and also education itself gives you knowledge and the skills necessary for becoming a member of a new society. All right, so that's how qualitative can work. The relationship between new immigrants, education background, and how fast they can be a member of the new society is just an example. So what are the qualitative data? It can appear in different forms. For instance, you have written documents, right? Now, the other thing is that if you go to the field, you take field notes, that counts as written documents as well. And you have interview transcriptions, right? So interviews we are going to discuss later on. So you have one-to-one interview, that's the most common one, and also focus group, right? So, but we'll address both advantages and disadvantages of both interview methods. And news archivals, it's also quite common, especially when you are interested in how historical events influence public opinion or things like that. And social media content, right? Big data analysis. Nowadays, you can grab tweets, Facebook pages, web pages, etc. And the case files, and also visual images and more. Now, let me give you more. One example in the more. That's YouTube videos. Right? So you can watch a bunch of videos and manually code them and categorize them into different themes. Then come up with those important themes that you want to analyze, right? So this basically means qualitative data can be in various forms. But why should we care, right? Someone say, "Oh, this is just reading some words. It's maybe cherry picking or something like that." Why qualitative methods are important? Let me give you an example. So this example is called which one is more likely. Of course, it's not definitive, right? So more likely to be guilty, sounds more likely to be a guilty person. The first one says dispatcher, right? 911, what's your emergency? The caller says get an ambulance to Fulton Street. I made it up. My friend's been shot. All right. So the second case, the dispatcher says 911, what's your emergency? The caller says, I have an infant. He's not breathing. Okay, so these are the two examples. So the question is, which one sounds more likely to be a guilty person? The answer is the second one. Now, of course, as I said, this is not definitive. Say, okay, the second person is a criminal or something like that. All right, but But based on many cases that the dispatcher received through 911 calls, the second case, that person, that caller sounds more likely to be a guilty one. Why? Because guilty person usually do not ask for help at the first place. All right, so in this case, it's kind of of course you need more evidence, right, if you want to commit people, but this is based on a lot of calls they received. So one kind of rule they come up from these experiences is guilty person usually do not ask for help at the first place, right? So that's why the second one sounds more likely to be a guilty person. All right, so qualitative study, the most common one could be like case study, especially single case study. Now, of course, you need to do it in depth, right? So which makes it a single but a complex case. Now, typically, you can focus on an organization, a district, a neighborhood, or a nation, a state, right? It doesn't matter as long as you focus on that one particular case, right? So, but sometimes we would select the case by saying we want a typical case, right? A representative case, a classic case, or we want an extreme case that's an outlier that makes it more unique, right? And theoretically interesting and practically important. All right. So, but anyway, you need to justify your selection criteria, why you choose that specific case for study. And the other thing related to case study is comparative case studies, right? So you want to select 2 or more cases, all right, to make a comparison. Why? Maybe they are similar, maybe they are different. So you want to find why they are similar in some aspects and while differs from the others. So that will offer more information to the readers, so the readers can draw their own conclusion from your comparison, right? And but for comparative case study, you also need to be very careful about the selection criteria, right? So you definitely don't want to compare like orange to apple. Maybe sometimes you want to do that on purpose, but generally speaking, you want to find some common ground, and while some other differences, right? So makes comparison more interesting. Okay. So one of the common methods used in qualitative research is interview. As I said, one-to-one or focus group, right? And the interviews can be part of a case study. Right? Now, of course, right, you are doing a case study, you are interested in one specific organization, then you interview their leaders, employees, customers, etc. Right? So then you come up with a conclusion. So that could be part of a case study because you are also looking at the organization's documents, written documents, right? The rules guide the organization, and also some maybe news archives related to the organization, and some other things, right? Social media contacts. Then you combine them together. So interview will be just a part of that larger case study. All right, so then the other qualitative methods I want to briefly mention. So the first one is observation, right? Directly observing a setting or behavior. Now this is an example written by a Chinese scholar called Xiaotong Fei Xiaotong, Peasant's Life in China, a field study of country life in the Yangtze Valley. So 乡村经济 in Chinese. So Fei's work is very famous in sociology, right? So it's a typical example about observing over years, and then come up with a conclusion, right? So describe it and come up with a conclusion. And you can also, be participant observation and ethnography. Participatory observation is you join a setting or activity in order to observe it. So, for instance, if you are interested in the life of factory girls in southern China, then you can pretend yourself to be a factory girl, right? You actually apply for the job and live with them and work with them, and then you observe, and then you talk to them, right? Record some of the conversations, and then they are all textual data to you, all right? Or you can use ethnography, so use participatory observation, right? So to better understand other society and cultures. That's especially true when you are like you live in the Western countries, but you are particularly interested in other societies' life, right? People in other societies, then that's maybe a good idea. All right, so the other example related to participatory observation is something called mystery shopper or secret shopper. So it's been widely used in management, marketing, or customer studies to evaluate the service quality, right? You pretend yourself to be a client, then you can evaluate the service, how it goes, right? You visit a restaurant, you visit a hotel, just to experience how they treat customers. Or audit studies, right? Used to uncover discrimination in employment, housing, and lending, etc. Financial, to learn how institutions treat different people differently. So, for instance, in job marketing, right? So you can send out surveys. All the other information are the same, only change the name, right? So some are white sounding names, some are black sounding names, some are Asian sounding names, to see who's gonna receive more callbacks than the other, right? So if there's a systematic discrimination, you're gonna predict that the white sounding name are going to receive more callbacks than the other races or ethnicity, people with other type of names that are non-typical white sounding names. All right, so the general flow of qualitative analysis is just you formulate your question, right? Identify the issues to explore, at least if you don't have a specific question in your mind. Then you get the data, then you analyze it and refine the question until you have the perfect research question that you think you are going to address. Then you get more data until you think you have sufficient data that can answer or provide an answer to your research question. So that's what we call reach the saturation. Then you stop the analysis, right? So that's the whole process. So you may ask for qualitative interview, right? So how we gonna actually conduct a qualitative interview? Now there's two forms I want to briefly introduce a little bit. So generally speaking, regardless this is a one-to-one interview or a focus group interview, you need to ask open-ended questions, which means they can't be simply answered by yes or no. Why? For example, if you are interviewing one person and both of you are not that talkative, then if your question can be simply answered by yes or no, do you consider your professor to be a good teacher or not? Then the person replied, yes. Then if both of you are not that good at small talk and ice breaking, then you may have an awkward moment of silence, right? So that will not facilitate further your interview. So you don't want to do that. So you want to avoid this close-ended questions. So instead you can say, okay, tell me how your professor is or is not a good teacher, right? Or what makes your professor a good teacher? How, what, why, right? Ask these open-ended questions. Tell me more about, say more about, explain that or that to me, right? So my favorite one is actually, could you give me an example of that, right? The thing you are interested. Why? Because when you transcribe your interviews and you get the textual data, you can actually use that as an example, right? So the person already gave you the example. So then you can quote it and use it in your analysis. That's why I often ask, could you give me an example during my interviews? So there's generally speaking, unless you don't have any specific questions in your mind, you want to explore and discover the important variables and then come up with a research question. If you already know something about the topic and you have a research question, then there's two formats you can use, structured or semi-structured interview. Unstructured, which means you need to be a very good talker, so to speak. All right, you can start with conversations and ask follow-up questions, and people are willing to talk to you. But generally speaking, the most common one will not be like fully structured, but semi-structured. So you have a set of predetermined questions, right? So use an interview guide, but you also want to allow some flexibility for asking follow-up questions. You don't want it to be like too stick to the script, right? Some people said something interesting and this is quite important to your research questions, then of course you are going to follow up, right? Dig deeper. So that's semi-structured. So a focus group, generally speaking, you don't want a very, very large group. It's harder to manage, right? It's even harder to schedule a time to ask people to come simultaneously. So generally won't be a very large group, all right, because it's also harder for you to manage the discussion. The benefits of conducting a focus group interview is obvious because you can collect data from different people at one setting, right? So you do one small group, for instance, that have 6 participants, then you have 6 different people's words and aspects, right? So instead of one-to-one, you need to do it 6 times to get about the same results. But the other benefits is, of course, when you are conducting a focus group interview, participants, they can cue each other, right? So when someone raises something and whether or not it's generalizable, it can be observed. For instance, all the people are nodding their heads when someone is talking about one point, which means they probably will agree with that, right? So at some degree, you can generalize that person's finding, that person's words as your finding. And also, it mimics the social process of thinking about issues, because generally speaking, if we are talking about public issues, social problems, that needs to be sit in a social setting, right? You are not doing it alone. You live in a society. You have people around you that gonna give you social pressure. All right, so this is basically the setting. Now, but one bad thing about focus group is, now first is, of course, it's more somehow costly, all right? And you need to hire an assistant. The reason is that I once conducted a focus group interview. However, I use an iPhone to take video record the whole conversation. So the bad news about recording is the phone. When you use it for a while for recording, about 30 minutes, it's too hot and it will automatically shut down. So my focus group is about 45 to 1 hour. So I lost the last part because my phone died somehow, right? So the assistant's role is not only to make sure all the equipments are working, but also can help you take some observational notes that be complement materials to your focus group interview transcriptions. All right, so this is quite important, but obviously this is more somehow costly, right? Yeah, so as I already said, the focus group is also difficult because it's, nowadays somehow it's very hard to put all the people in a room simultaneously. It needs a lot of coordination and scheduling. So that's the disadvantage you need to think about, right? While one-on-one is obviously more somehow flexible than that. All right, so final question. How many interviews are enough? Now, there's no rule of thumb. As I said, it all depends on your research question and the research purpose. But this famous paper, how many interviews are enough, actually suggests 12 is a practical number, all right? So if you want to do an interview study, and try to convince other people that your choice, say for instance, you only selected 20, may seem a small number, but still you can use this article to justify your choices. Again, let me emphasize here, it really depends on your research question and the research purpose. Okay. All right, I think that will be all for this short video. Thank you very much.